So here's the thing, Marvel's obviously been dipping in form, and on top of that, we've gotten 3 really, really bad Fantastic Four movies. So the fact that this one is at least pretty good, I think that's a win in my book. What's up guys, Mason the Brock Henderson here, and this is Fantastic Four First Steps. So going into this, I wasn't really sure what to expect. I've somehow managed to avoid most spoilers. Obviously, the trailer spoils a lot, but I will go ahead and put up a spoiler warning before I talk too much about the film, just in case you haven't seen it yet, and in case you missed the spoiler in the title of this video and the spoiler in the thumbnail. Here's the spoiler warning, just for anybody, so now you can't be mad at me. But I mean, about halfway through the movie is when we finally learn what Galactus is looking for. He wants their kid. Well, that was said in the trailer, so that's not really a surprise, but they save it till we're halfway done. Galactus being on Earth, that's something that was spoiled in the trailer. So this whole time they're setting up this plan to transport the Earth all the way across the galaxy, or I guess several galaxies away. Well, you know that's not going to work because in the trailer, they showed Galactus on Earth. And he wouldn't be on Earth as if they teleported away, so that doesn't work. And while that plan does end up being used in a way to transport Galactus away, it still feels like we spent way too much time on this plan that as the audience, if you've seen the trailer, you know it's not going to work. But I hate trailers nowadays because of that reason. There's so much about the movie that if you've seen the trailer, and I tried to avoid it, but unfortunately it was just everywhere when it was coming out. But if you've seen it, you've seen a good chunk of the movie. You know a good chunk of what's going to happen. Not that a lot of this wasn't entirely unpredictable, but we'll get to that in a minute. First, I do want to talk about what was good about the movie, because overall, I had a good enough time with it. I would say this was probably somewhere in the middle on my rating scale. If I'm going 1 out of 10, I'd probably give it a 6, maybe close to a 7, but I wouldn't say this was a great movie, and I'll talk about why, but we'll talk about some of the great stuff in it first. First of all, huge props to Pedro Pascal as Reed Richards. To be honest, when he was cast in the role, I didn't really see it, because to me, Reed Richards is nerdy, he's antisocial, he's kind of an awkward dude. And Pedro Pascal doesn't scream awkward dude to me. But honestly, he played this really, really well. I thought his delivery, a lot of the dialogue felt kind of stilted, but for him, he made it work. He used a certain voice for it, he used a certain delivery that made me believe this is Reed Richards. So much about his thought process, you could tell from his facial expressions as well, what his mind was thinking at the time. So I thought he did a really good job with this part, and he was, for me, the standout performer of the movie. Vanessa Kirby, for me, was good in a lot of the quieter scenes, especially her and Pedro. They had a really good chemistry as Reed and Sue, and I think that really showed through in a lot of their more personal scenes. Unfortunately, where it fell apart for her was in the more intense scenes. I don't know why, I don't know what it was, but there was something about her delivery whenever she was screaming or yelling that felt fake. It felt hollow. The scene where she's given birth, the scene at the end whenever she's pushing Galactus back, a lot of it just felt fake to me. Like, I've seen people scream and yell and believe that they were exerting so much force. I didn't feel that from her at all. It felt like she was just putting on a face like she was exerting force, and she was making noises and kind of half screaming like she was, but she never really felt like she was truly exerting all this energy out of her. It's weird to make that comparison, that pushing a baby out and pushing her force field out at Galactus, they're comparable in a way. But yeah, those scenes for me is where acting fell apart, but most of her acting was the more subtle, the more downplayed. You know, the speech that she gives to everybody whenever she's holding Franklin and telling them why she's not going to give up her kid. I enjoyed it. I thought it was a well done speech. I will also say the family dynamic I thought worked really well. The scenes where they were all 4 together and talking and cracking up, they had some good moments in it. Those were probably the closest that I came to laughing, was when the 4 of them were talking to each other. I think the story was decent. There are some problems that I'll discuss in a little bit, but I think the setup for it maybe could have been a little bit more slowed down. I think this was an hour and 45, maybe close to 2 hours long. I feel like they could have stretched it a little bit more. Ironic stretch, Mr. Fantastic. But it did feel like some of the editing, some of the jumping from scene to scene, it kind of felt jarring. Like we'd end a scene and then suddenly we are several hours later, and you can only pick that up by context clues. There was no real sign of, hey, we're suddenly jumping several hours in the future. So it was really hard to keep up with some of that. And lastly, I think Galactus was pretty well done. He was properly intimidating, very hard to take down, very massive. Now, I will say when I picture Galactus, I do see him as more so of almost the size of a planet. So the fact that he's basically as tall as a skyscraper only is a little more underwhelming than I was expecting, but still very much a threat. And I think they did a good job of showcasing his size in several shots. But unfortunately for me, that's where the good stuff ends, and that's what I think holds it back. I'll give it credit for the good stuff because some of the Marvel stuff that's come out recently hasn't really had much redeeming quality about it at all. So this at least did have enough good stuff to make it overall enjoyable, but there was a lot dragging this down that I just can't look past. First and foremost, Johnny and Ben, just not really a fan of. The comedy between the two of them, or I guess comedy, because I wasn't laughing. It was not really funny. It felt like a couple of actors that they just said, hey, improv some funny stuff. And they are not capable of improv, from what I could tell. So unfortunately, that dragged it down a lot when the two of them were interacting. Unfortunately, I thought Johnny as a character also was just not that entertaining to me. Like, I'm not saying it was a great performance, but I remember Chris Evans as Johnny Storm in the older movies. This guy, I don't feel like I'm going to remember a lot of what he said or did. There's one thing I'll remember, but it's a story-based thing that I think was just really dumb. As far as his performance, it felt like it was underplayed. Like they wanted him to be a goofball, but not too far. And then for Ben, I just think there was much more to do with him here. Again, I'm going to remember more of Michael Chiklis's performance as the Thing than I am of this guy. I went ahead and looked up the names of the actors just so I could remember, because obviously I knew Pedro Pascal and Vanessa Kirby because their names were everywhere when the movie was coming out, but Johnny and Ben's were not. So Joseph Quinn as Johnny, Ebon Moss-Bachrach as Ben. I gotta say, what a name. I'll give him that. It is kind of funny if that is how you pronounce it, Bachrach. Rock is in his name. But I will say for Ben, I did think that was partially on the writers, that it felt forgettable, because I don't think they gave him much. You know, with Johnny, at least they gave him the story with the Silver Surfer and trying to learn her language and all of that stuff. With Ben, they gave him this couple of scenes with this school teacher that he seems to be hitting it off with, and that's it. He sees her at one point after he messes with some kids because they want him to pick up a car and throw it, and then she comes out and talks to him. They have a little flirty session, and then she's gone. And then he goes to see her whenever everybody's preparing for the end of the world, and then we don't really see what happens after that. They just show that he's going to visit. But even in his scenes, though, I just feel like a lot of the lines he delivered felt lackluster, I guess is the best word, kind of stale. And I don't know how much of that is maybe he's just not a voice actor, and it seems like they ADR'd most of his lines. I could be wrong, but a lot of these scenes, it didn't feel like he was actually there. It felt like they just had a CGI puppet in place and they just had him do his lines after. So maybe that's part of why, is he just wasn't fully there in the scene, so he wasn't able to bring his A game. But yeah, the two of them were definitely the weaker part. They were better whenever all four of them were together, but the two of them either on their own or whenever there was just the two of them, I felt like those scenes really dragged for me. And talking a little bit about that CGI, yeah, the CGI for this was not great. There were several scenes where it looked really fake. I don't know if it looked better on the big screen or not. There were several scenes that stood out in my mind where I'm thinking, that looks ugly as hell. I mean, I will say at least the CGI baby in this one looks better than the CGI baby in Twilight by far. But just picking out a few that stood out, first of all, the CGI with the Silver Surfer and Johnny, I felt like those scenes looked really, really fake. The scene where they first see Galactus, they do this wide shot where they're looking up at him. They didn't look like they were in the scene at all. It looked like really bad green screen. There were a couple scenes in the final fight where it felt like they were on green screen and they didn't do a good job of keying. Like when Reed is running across the rooftops, he didn't look like he was actually on top of buildings in any of those scenes. So I feel like this is just an unfortunate side effect of how many movies they still want to try to get out there. And also, I think how lazy a lot of CGI artists are these days. I don't know if it's all of them. I don't know if it's just specific ones or if they've just gone cheap and maybe hired people that don't charge as much because they're not as good at CGI. But yeah, unfortunately, it just did not look good for, I would say, about half the movie. Some scenes looked fine, most of them didn't. Before I get into the story, there actually is one more thing I forgot that just popped back into my head that I wanted to talk about that I did think was good, and that is the setting. I think this kind of retro futuristic look, kind of Jetsons feeling to it, I did like that. I'll give them credit. This setting definitely worked. I like the fact that it is set on a different world. They have been doing this for a little while, so we do see them without having to go through that origin story that I think we've seen done twice now and not done well. So I'll give some credit for that. But getting into the story, it was very hit or miss. Again, a lot of this is in the trailer, so there's not a whole lot of surprise going into this movie. But a lot of it is predictable, which isn't always a bad thing. If it's predictable but it's done well, a lot of the times I can still enjoy it. But unfortunately, I just feel like there was nothing really new brought to this that got me excited to see more. They're in this world where they're praised, they're worshipped as heroes. Of course, everything's going to go wrong. There's going to be a point where the public turns on them. And unfortunately, because there's so many stories to get into, that's sort of washed over quickly. They get back, everybody's concerned, they don't really give any confident answers, so everybody's worried. People start hating them because they won't give up their kid. And then a couple scenes later, Sue's going outside, talking to them, gives this impassioned speech, and everybody's good. Everybody's on their side again. I feel like that could have been something to explore a little bit more in depth with them. As far as the story with the baby, we see a little bit of back and forth on this. We see Reed as the more logical thinking person, thinking if this is going to save the world, maybe it's something to entertain, where of course Sue looks at it and goes, absolutely not, because we're not giving up our kid. And I do think those scenes were some of the better scenes in the movie whenever they do have those discussions, because I do think we see in those scenes logic versus emotion. And we have two characters that are steeped in either side going head to head about this discussion, and you do see where the different perspectives on it are. And of course, the end shows the compromise, where Reed logically sees that using Franklin as bait is the best possible way. Sue doesn't want to, but she realizes it's the best way if it's going to protect their kid. So it's a good marrying of logic and emotion into their final plan that ends up setting up for how they manage to take down Galactus. I still don't really know much about the baby. I don't know if this is something from the comics where they do have a baby that has this cosmic power. I don't really understand what Galactus means by he's going to take his throne, because the title of Galactus passed down through all these different beings that have so much cosmic power that they can feed on worlds. I don't know. There's just a lot of questions here that I still feel like weren't very well answered in this movie. But I will say it is a bit of a deus ex machina that just somehow the kid crawls up on Sue and that's what saves her, I guess. I don't know. They didn't really explain. It just happened. I'm like, okay, whatever. They want to have their happy ending, so sure. The baby saves Sue because of his cosmic power. But the final thing to talk about before we get into the bottom of the barrel is the plan to stop Galactus. It was a little simplistic. Like, again, they have this plan to transport the Earth to the far reaches of the universe, which I'm assuming Reed did some calculations and found a place where Earth could be, that because we know it sits perfectly in our solar system to make life habitable for it. So I don't know if he did some calculations and found another place that fits those criteria for Earth to survive. But whatever, they set up this whole thing. Obviously, it's not going to work because, again, in the trailer, they showed Galactus on Earth. So the Silver Surfer destroys everything. Their plan now, tricking Galactus into walking into one of the teleporters and transporting him to the far reaches of the universe, basically the very edge of the universe. And it's as simple as, we'll put the baby here in this one area that definitely looks different than everything else around it, and almost looks like it's a trap. We'll put the baby here, he'll get in, we'll blind him for a second, swap the baby out for another thing, and even though we've seen him use his powers to find the baby before, we've seen him locate the baby in Sue's stomach, we're not going to realize that he can do that again? And so sure enough, he gets there, he's about to step in and goes, wait a minute, this looks weird. And then he scans for the baby, finds the baby, and is like, you clever bugs. I'm like, are they? Is that really that clever? I thought it was pretty simplistic. But now let's get into the final thing, which was definitely the worst part about this movie, and honestly the biggest plot hole of this movie. And maybe I'm wrong about this, but you can't learn a whole language from one sentence translated. I could be wrong. Maybe there are some people that are capable of doing this, but it's not like I could sit here and go, oh, in French, thank you for your service is...
Merci pour votre service.
I don't know why I said it so slow, but I can't use that and go, oh, well, now let me learn the entire French language, because that's not how that works. So him finding out this one phrase that she said, what was it, like, die with your people or something like that? He learns that one phrase and somehow deciphers her entire language from that. And then because they've been recording all these messages for a long time now, suddenly he's able to piece all these other messages, speak to her in her language, show her all these messages, learn her backstory. There's just so much about this that does not make sense. And it's the crux of the movie too, because she has to feel bad about what she did because of everything he says to her, to the point where she's going to sacrifice herself to take Galactus far away. Why could you not have had it be something a little bit more realistic? Like, he has heard all of these messages, maybe a couple of them, because we do know there are other planets out there seemingly that speak English. Maybe have some of those planets sending messages about the fact that they're dying and talking about this Silver Surfer or whatever. Or I don't know, even have her attack him or something, and her attack allows him to understand her language or something like that. But nothing. He just hears one phrase, gets it translated, and now he can learn the entire language. That's so stupid. And honestly, that whole scene with him and her, whenever he does go into her backstory, first of all, it's expositional as hell. And he's just sitting there spelling out her whole life story for us, because she obviously knows her life story. Also, how did he manage to program all of these different screens around the city to start putting these voices out there? When did he have time to set that up? Or does he just have the technology built into his little watch? There's so much about this that is unrealistic. So that scene for me really took me out of it. I was on board for most of the film. Again, there were several things that I wasn't really enjoying that much, but I was still invested enough. I was still on board for the film. But that scene really did a lot to just make me go, yeah, whatever, sure. I guess he can do that. That's whatever. So again, if I'm wrong about that, if there are people out there who can take one phrase, get it translated, and then learn an entire language from that, then okay. I can suspend my disbelief a little bit, but that to me sounds so ridiculous. There's no way. And again, the fact that he's able to set up this whole thing and convince her to change her mind also feels a little ridiculous. But like I said, that was the worst of the worst. It did turn off my excitement a little bit for the climax and the fight against Galactus, but it didn't get any worse than that, so I guess that's a good thing, because I've seen a lot of these Marvel products be a lot worse than that. And I guess to mention the post-credits scene, or the mid-credits scene, because the post-credits scene was just a little theme song for the Fantastic Four cartoon. But the mid-credits scene, of course, this does set up for Doctor Doom. We don't actually see him, but we do see the cloak, we see the mask. I still don't know how I feel about it, to be perfectly honest. Casting Robert Downey Jr. in the role does feel like a bit of a cash grab, does feel like a bit of a, hey, fans, come back. You remember how much you loved Robert Downey Jr. in this role? Well, guess what? He's back, and he's going to be Doctor Doom this time. Ooh, what's that going to mean? I hope I'm wrong. I hope they do something interesting with it, but personally, I'm just worried that it's not going to live up to the hype that I think a lot of people are building up, knowing that he's going to be Doctor Doom, and knowing that it seems like Doctor Doom is going to be the main bad guy going forward. But we'll see what happens next. I don't really know what's on the horizon. Obviously, Doomsday is the big thing they're building up towards, because we saw Thunderbolts ended with Fantastic Four ship flying into our world in the MCU. I think Spider-Man is on the way. Might be the next thing. I'm not entirely sure. I know I have 2 more little short series to watch. I don't really think they're connected to anything, but it's the Eyes of Wakanda and Marvel Zombies that I have left, and I'll probably just do one review for the whole series of 4 episodes for both of those. But I figure if it's part of the MCU, I might as well check it out and see what it's all about. But I think that will do it for this review, so cue the outro. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching that review. I hope you enjoyed it. First and foremost, please leave your thoughts in the comments down below. I love having discussions with people, so whatever your thoughts were, whether you agree or disagree with me, please leave them down below. Obviously, no spoilers. Also, if you did find yourself enjoying this review and you want to see more, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps me out. I also have a gaming channel as well as a channel where I talk about soccer, so if you want to give those a follow as well, that would be much appreciated. And lastly, if you want to help me improve upon the quality of these channels, I do have a Patreon. All of this is in the description below. With all that being said, I hope you guys have a great day. I will talk to y'all later. Peace out.